Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Coaching Call podcast. On this podcast, we'll cover various types of coaching by trainers in sports, martial arts, fitness, and business. We'll discuss each coach's methods to getting the most out of their respective athletes or clients and how they attempt to change the platform in which they coach. Join us on a fun adventure as we discuss unique coaching styles. Coaching is a universal part of how we get others to get something done. Join your host, Raphael, and his guests on this unique journey in coaching.
Hi, I'm Sifu Raphael, and this is the Coaching Call podcast. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. This episode was made possible by listeners like you. Christian, thank you so much for joining me on Coaching Call. How are you this morning?
Hey, Sifu, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. You're impacting the world, not just a few people, but the world, and I love that. But before we get even into what you're doing today, I would love, this is for me personally, more than probably anyone else, I would love to know about your childhood. Before you were age of 10, where'd you grow up? And who would you say were your biggest influences, even before the age of 10?
That's a really interesting question because exactly at age 10, my family emigrated from Cuba. So I spent my first 10 years of life living in a communist regime, for which I'm actually really grateful because there's so many things we take for granted in the United States and other developed democratic countries that are just not available. I mean, not to mention the big things like being able to go to the college that you want to and educate and choose whatever it is that you want to study and what you want to do with your life. But even the little things, like what's chewing gum to us? It's nothing. You just put a stick of gum in your mouth and you spit it out and don't even think about it. And we had it better than most because my parents had friends who worked in foreign embassies. But every once in a while we used to get a box of chiclets. I don't know if you remember the little chiclets.
Oh, I remember.
But, we used to split them between the kids, and we'd chew on that thing all day, and then at night get a glass of water with a little bit of water at the bottom, and put toothpaste in it and stick our gum in it so that it would be minty the next day, and then hide it so my mom wouldn't throw it out. So and again, we grew up. There were a few toys to be had, so we grew up reading, and we had a TV, but there was nothing really worth watching. So we grew up reading, and for that, I'm really grateful.
It's very interesting when you talk about the chiclets and all that kind of stuff, because I remember reading a book about a kid who had gotten a piece of chocolate, like a regular piece of chocolate, and because it was so rare for him to have, he actually took him a year to eat one bar. like think of the little pieces that you break off,
Yeah.
like a tiny little piece, and then put it away and wrap it really well. And then when you consider what we can appreciate, it's the little things. And people think, oh, when I get this huge thing, that's when I'll appreciate. No, you need to appreciate the tiny little things in your life. So thank you for that, because that really speaks volumes of understanding the value of the little things before we get to the bigger things, right?
Yes, and then of course the big things, like freedom, freedom to speak your mind and freedom to congregate, things that we also take for granted. To be able to vote in a way that actually matters. Those things I wish we would value them more.
Unfortunately, not everybody does. So tell me, who would you say, and that had to be some sort of a crazy trip for your parents, but for you, not as much maybe. But your parents had to do a lot of finagling to leave Cuba and to bring, I don't know how many of you guys came over, but who were your influences back then? And do you know your parents struggle?
Oh my God. And what makes it really a fascinating story is that when we left, we were a large family, a very Catholic family, 9 kids. My oldest sister was 12. I was 10. My mom was 8 months pregnant with the last one, who was born in Spain. We had to leave through Spain at that time. You couldn't fly directly to the States.
Mm.
And I mean, just the process. I mean, and yes, as kids, we were sheltered about a lot of the fearful stuff that was going on behind the scenes, underneath the surface. But there were a couple of things that they couldn't avoid. Like, one time I remember there were, my parents were able to buy stuff black market, and they bought, like, I don't know, half a cow or something. And in Cuba, which a lot of people don't know what it's like to live in a totalitarian regime, in every city block, there's a Comité de Defensa. I don't know if that's still the case, like a defense committee. And they're basically, stooge pigeons, like just keeping an eye on the comings and goings of everybody in the block.
Mm.
And so they must have reported them, because the private police, not the, I mean, the like, it's called a G2. It's not like, it's like sort of like the FBI, but the secret police,
Right.
was knocking on the door. And while my mom was stalling in the front door, my father was out back throwing all the meat over the fence to the doors and to the neighbors next door.
Mm.
So there were moments where, at least the older ones were able to catch on about the danger. A lot of their friends, my parents' friends, ended up in prison as political prisoners for many, many years, or, were killed, were shot.
Wow. It had to be very dramatic for those who can understand what was going on. So, who would you say around that time were your influencers? Was it your 12-year-old sister? Was it your mom? Was it your dad? People that you looked up to?
I mean, definitely family, for sure. We are and still remain very close knit. But one of my earliest heroes, besides Tarzan, were the Catholic saints. Those were my parents. My parents had a lot of those books lying around, so I grew up reading those stories, and like like imagining, fantasizing about being a martyr. And thankfully, I no longer have martyr fantasies, but I was definitely impacted by that. And yeah, I think my aunts were also, because there were so many kids, the older ones would go to my aunt's house and just hang out there before we went to school. So mostly family, and again, because it was such a fear-based environment, the families, for the most part, became really close knit.
Mhm.
Those
I'm number.
depend on. I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm number 10 of 12.
Oh wow!
I know what you're talking about when it comes to large family.
Wow, number 10 of 12. Wow.
And so my parents immigrated from Colombia. Yes, it was not as, crazy as it was for you guys, but still, imagine bringing that many kids over.
Wow.
They had to do it in separate trips. They didn't bring us all over at once. So we were scattered throughout Colombia just so that they can get here, establish, I guess, a frontier, if you will, and then go that. So when you talk about your trip was to Spain, how was that like for you? And being that Spain, you already spoke Spanish, so that was easy enough, right? Transition, somewhat. I know the Spaniard or the Spanish they speak in Spain is two of them, Catalano y Castellano, and those are like almost like different languages, if you will. How was that for you?
Well, Spain for us was amazing. It was like a brand new world. I mean, going to a supermarket,
Right. Yeah.
Seeing things and eating things that we'd only read about, ham and apples and stuff like that, and just being overwhelmed visually by this, and sensorially, the smells of walking into a store was just amazing. And it was also a critical time. Like my parents, I can only imagine what they went through. My mom gave birth to the last one a month, a couple of weeks after we arrived, or a month after we arrived. And my father had to immediately start studying for when we landed here. We spent 6 months in Spain, so he like had to study so that he could pass the foreign medical exam, so he could start practicing while we got here. And so the difficult part was when we landed in the U.S. because language was definitely a factor, and we went to the small town in Georgia, Milledgeville, Georgia, that was one of the like 2 or 3 places in the U.S. where the Cuban psychiatrists could practice as they were getting licensed here. But that was a tough part because they didn't take very kindly to foreigners. I didn't speak a word of English, and it was tough. It was a tough 3 years.
Oh yeah, I think you and I probably went through the same experience because I came when I was 8, and I didn't know the language. And when I went to school, no one spoke Spanish. I mean, no one, not even the teachers or the kids. It was, who's a crazy looking kid over there that doesn't speak our language, right? So you can imagine, I'm sure you went through it, some bullying as well, people not understanding you, right?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. So not a pleasant, I don't have pleasant memories of those 3 years.
Scary.
And then what's interesting, once I finally learned the language at that age, you pick it up a lot more quickly and became, accepted. Then we moved back to Miami, where I went to a school that was like 99% Cuban. So then I stuck out again, like a thumb sore, like a sore thumb, because I sounded like a Georgia peach. So yeah, doomed to be different this lifetime.
Very interesting. Do you recall when you went to school, were there any teachers that impacted you who took a special interest in you just to realize that you were going through a hard time and to help you out?
Always, always.
Nice.
Yeah, there's several that come to mind that just, it just opens up my heart because they really like took me under their wing, and they saw my potential. They took extra care with me. So I have the highest respect
Right.
for teachers. And I mean, that's another thing about our society, that we really so undervalue our teachers, not realizing that the invaluable work, worth that they have, and the difference that make, and how in many ways they're like parenting, or at least co-parenting, so many of our kids.
Yeah. Because a lot of teachers spend more time with somebody's kids than they do with their own kids, right?
For sure.
And the impact that they create. And I know it's very difficult because I have a lot of clients of mine who are teachers, and how difficult it is when a child is not getting what they need, and it's hard to communicate with the parents, and the parents don't want to hear it, and all this kind of stuff. So you're in the US now. You start to learn the language, you start to adapt. Do you still have some of the friends that you made back then, or have they faded away? And who would you say were your biggest impacts? Now we're going to go 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. What was that like for you?
Yeah, there are some friends from that age, even from those first 3 years in Milledgeville, that I'm still in touch with.
Nice.
From high school, a couple that I'm connected to and close with. Yeah, and high school was a different experience. It was an all-boy Catholic school, which was incredible in terms of education, and it was a small school, so there was there's a sense of community and unity. And at the same time, kids that age, especially all boys, can be cruel. So there was things to navigate as well in that area. One of the defining points, I think, was when I was in 10th grade. There was I was part of the high school paper, the staff, the news magazine. And so there was a power struggle, and for long story short, I ended up being editor of the paper the next year. And I can't tell you how painfully shy I was. Like I was okay one-on-one, but if you added a third person, I clammed up.
Really?
And so, oh yeah, I mean, to the degree that looking back on it, I didn't set out to do this intentionally, but looking back on it, in high school, I had all A's except for one B the last year. And I know looking back on it that I subconsciously did that because it was not a hard class. It was all I had to do was read books, and it was like a directed studies, advanced placement, something or other. That all I had to do was read books and do a term paper for each book. And I knew how to do that. But I turned them in late, which was enough to get me a B, which it was enough to knock me out of contention for the valedictorian, because there was no way that I could have stood up then in front of a auditorium filled with hundreds and hundreds of people and deliver a speech. I wasn't ready to do that, which is interesting because flash forward to now, and I've spoken at dozens of universities and churches and bookstores all over the world. So I say that only to, if there's anybody watching this who's still struggling with some of the traumas and conditioning from childhood, is that I know all that stuff can be healed and transcended, and that there's a way that we can work through all that stuff so that we can really step into our power and fulfill our purpose, the reason that we're really here for.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. This is why I created Speaking Prowess, right? Speaking Prowess is where we actually teach people communication and so forth. So for me, it's always, how do we communicate, and knowing, yeah, even who your audience is and all of those things, that's very important as well. So when you consider what you just talked about, that you've been all over the world, you've spoken at all colleges, churches, bookstores, all these different places. What got you there? And what was your first moment that you said, this is what I need to do with my life? What age do you recall?
It's a really good question, because I was able to get through in high school. I had to do a couple of speeches. I was able to get through college without having to get up in front of a group, and so I graduated. And yet, I knew in the depths of me, in my core, that I had to get over that fear. If I was going to fulfill my purpose, if I was going to be able to make a difference at the levels that I wanted to make a difference and felt called to make a difference in this world, I just couldn't be that way. I had to handle it. So I signed up for a public speaking class, which I hated. I detested it. Because for 14 weeks, every Thursday night, I'd had to get up and give 3 2-minute speeches. Come Monday, I was already dreading it. What am I going to talk about? And all the angsting that we do, all the futurizing that we do, and how we scare ourselves before something even happens, or maybe it won't even happen. But what happened was, halfway through it, session 7 or 8, it stopped being such a big deal. And there's a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. And here it is in 30 seconds. Imagine concentric circles, right? So this circle represents our comfort zone. This is where we're comfortable being with ourselves, being with other people, being in the world. And we know growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. It just doesn't. So every time we take a little step and take a risk, place ourselves in some kind of risk, or take a challenge for the sake of spiritual growth or personal growth, emotional growth, in terms of fulfilling our purpose, what we're doing is we're expanding that comfort zone. And that's how we transcend fear, because we have a misunderstanding. We think to be fearless means that we don't feel fear anymore. And that's not what it is. Fearlessness means that we no longer allow fear to hold us back, to keep us stuck. So if we would take that one action, like one step, one little step, or maybe a big one, right? We get to decide whether it's a baby step or a huge leap. But if we would commit to ourselves that every week we're going to do something that's going to place ourselves beyond our comfort zone. And it could be just saying yes, going on a coffee date. It could be whatever we want it to be. Or sending out a resume, putting in for a promotion, whatever it is. After the end of 52 weeks, our comfort zone is going to be way out there now. And it's irreversible.
When you talked about what we can do with fear, right? I actually made fear my friend so that we can take on challenges together. When you consider you started and you dreaded it, but it became habit. And some people continue with the negative habit, but you said it's getting more comfortable. I'm feeling it more. So what would you say was the end of that class like for you?
Well, I mean, that was a long time ago, so I don't remember how I felt. I'm sure
Yes.
there was a huge sense of accomplishment. But flash forward to today. If I'm speak in front of spoken in front of a conference with 1,000 people or more, and sure, done a TED talk, a TEDx talk, and sure, like right before the moment of going on stage, is like I've got butterflies. I have, I'm nervous about it. Maybe I even lost sleep if it's a big deal, if it's a big event, and maybe I didn't sleep so well the night before. But once I take that final act, and I'm on stage, and it's finally on, it's like the fear disappears.
Mm.
And so that we know that about fear, that it's just a function of our mind, of our ego mind. There's, I mean, of course, there's fear that's designed to ensure survival, and a fear of a saber-toothed tiger. But the fears that you and I are talking about now are just like self-inflicted mind. Let's say screw. If for I don't know that I can use the F bomb here, but it's the fear that's inside of our heads that's part of what the mind does to keep us stuck in what it considers to be safety, from its very limited perspective. And so that's the part of the process, like, and which I know that you also work with, supporting people to transcend fear, is both understanding it, and then sometimes understanding, like, it only gets you so far. Then you just have to act. You got to take an act, and it is that act of saying no. Hey, you know what? I'm not going to allow that fear, that stuff in my head, to hold me back from knowing what I'm here to do, what I must do. And pretty soon, I mean, it's not that I don't know that fear ever goes completely away, but it's less and less strong, less and less frequent. And when it gets us, we spend less time stuck in it. And we certainly don't go around living in that fearful state that many of us have done, and which I know from my past, that used to be living in a constant state of fear. And that just doesn't even come up anymore for me. Hardly ever comes up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you realize that you can do something. When did you get into the spiritual aspect of what you do? For you, was it a person? Was it a moment in time that you realized this is me?
Well, I mean, I think I've always had that, whatever it is, where you call it a vocation, or where you call it I
A
don't know,
drive.
a draw, a calling, whatever it is, or a part of my personality. I think all of us are spiritual, in quotes. We get into, we confuse that word with religion, and because of the ways that religions have cost, I mean, they're not knocking them 100%, but religions have done a lot of good, and they've done a lot of bad. A lot of caused a lot of problems in humanity, including wars in the name of God, that we're still living, at our current level of evolution. Um, so that spiritual, I think we're all spiritual beings, that happen to be having a physical experience, and how we express it, right? We get to choose how we express that. So for me, like, I translated that in different ways at different points in my life. There was a point in my life where I thought, I wanted to be a priest. I wanted to be a Jesuit priest, and then realized that construct was very limiting for me, didn't really have room for me. And then, I went through a phase of saying, well, if that's the case, then I don't want anything to do with, quote unquote, God, or religion, or spirituality. So like many people, I threw the baby out with a baptismal water. And then life, went through my life through my 20s, and as I started approaching 30, I guess for many of us, it's a significant turning point. So I started to ask myself the deeper questions: what do I really want from life? What am I here for? And that began a process of searching, which led me to an opportunity where I discovered breathwork as a healing modality, which then led me to learning how to do meditation. I started educating myself and learning about religions and spiritual traditions of the East, about indigenous traditions, and began to find my own way um, in expressing my what to me is an innate spiritual nature that again we got to express in a way that works for each of us.
But you didn't just do it for yourself because you are a spiritual teacher. So you decided also that you were going to help other people. Am I right to say that you're a spiritual teacher?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And as I said before, my dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I was on a route to get a PhD. So I always had that. I was the type of person that even as a kid, even older kids would come to me for advice and for suggestions and to share secrets and that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So I think that was an innate thing that I just had to navigate and figure out how to express. And I knew the way that I coach now, my retreats, my workshops, it's a combination of psychology and spirituality. One of the reasons that I didn't pursue the PhD is that back then when I was going to school, psychology completely rejected its spiritual discussions. And to me, that's ridiculous and ludicrous to try to reject any part of us, whether it's our spirituality or our sexuality that many of us struggle with. And so I found a way to combine those two, to blend those two. So it's a psycho-spiritual approach. I think there's schools now, I know there's schools now where you can get a PhD in psychology that includes spirituality and the study of the transcendent.
Yeah. No, without a doubt. So when you consider the fact that you were going to get a PhD and you realize that you have this ability to help other people and you went for it, was it a person who said, hey, by the way, you're so gifted with this? Or was it your own realization that you realized that, hey, I can actually help more people if I start to help more people, if I start to coach them, to teach them, to empower them? What was that for you?
I think I always knew. Like I was always, I was naturally, like innately introverted, which for me meant that I process things internally before I communicate them. Whereas, an extrovert is figuring out what they think and they believe as they're speaking. As an introvert, I dive deep within and I have to do a lot of deep soul searching and figure out what I believe and why and how I got here and what makes me do the things that I do. So I think that was a natural instinct. Also, as a gay man, became a necessity for me at a young age. Try to figure out like why and what makes me different and why this and why that, and question everything. Which was incredibly painful and very difficult, but I'm incredibly grateful for that too, because it gave me such depth of understanding that those feelings of alienation, of being different, of being the only one, of feeling like there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough, that I was damaged goods. That's the kind of stuff that I help people with. All those expressions and depth of self-esteem, so that I know from personal experience that self-doubt, even self-hatred, can be converted and transformed into self-confidence and self-acceptance and self-love. So I walk my talk. I practice what I preach. It works.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm always encouraging people to do is to look in the mirror and say, man, I love you. Right? Because it starts with us. If we can love ourselves, we can love others. And a lot of people, and you said they don't have self-worth, so self-esteem even. to even be able to look in the mirror and say, "You're beautiful. I'm happy that we're together here." Right? So many people are afraid of who they are, but when we can accept ourselves, man. And one of the things I said to somebody recently, they said, "You dress so nice," and you were like, I was in an event, and I said, I don't dress like this to impress you or anybody else. They're like, "Well, we thought you did." I'm like, "Not at all." I said, "I do it for me because I feel good. That's the only reason." I said, "If I wanted to impress everybody here, I'd come naked." Right? That's impressive. Now, I didn't, so I wasn't there to impress anybody. So when we can consider how we show up and what we bring, right? So you're bringing all this inspiration, you're bringing your teaching, your spirituality, and you're helping people. And I guess that's what makes you a transformation coach, right? And you talked about breath work, and you talked about understanding you. So you're helping people kind of liberate themselves from themselves, right?
Yeah, yeah. Delete the kind of. It's like, absolutely. To free ourselves from our self-made prisons, which is why in every retreat I do, no matter what the theme is, or every workshop, whether it has to do on relationships, unconscious relationships that have a chance of working, or whether it's about personal empowerment. I do work specifically for women about women's empowerment. I do stuff about life purpose, but consistent to it all, the only two things that I always include, one is breath work, because I've yet to come across anything that heals past trauma as quickly and as effectively. And not only does it heal at that level, but it heals like emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and even physically. And I know that sounds too good to be true, that just from breathing all that can happen, but I can't argue with the results. That's 33 years of facilitating that experience for thousands of people. And so that, and then I always talk about the ego mind, because if we want to have relationships that have a chance of working, or have a life that is filled with meaning, with purpose, have that sense of who we are, that self-acceptance and self-love and self-worth that you and I were talking about, we've got to understand what the ego mind is, because that is the obstacle to all of it. And so yeah, the work is about liberating from that self-made prison of the mind that has us stuck in lack and fear and limitation, reactivity, victimization, projection, all the things that the minds do that are the source of all our suffering.
Huge. That is huge. So I mean, and you're so right that breath work is so important, because we need to breathe anyway. We might as well know how. So many people, they don't know how to breathe. A lot of people hyperventilate, they get anxious, they get nervous, their breathing changes. And I tell people, when are you breathing best? When are you? And so a lot of people, they have to think about it. Like, I don't know when. Maybe right now that you're calm. Right? And a lot of people don't realize that when they become anxious, their breathing changes. When they become nervous, their breathing changes. If you're being attacked, your breathing's definitely going to change, right? So your breath allows you to react to the environment around you. Right? Would you agree?
Oh my God. It's all about the breath. It's literally, breath is life. And the breath is our most loyal, faithful companion on this journey of life. And yet, the tragic thing that you're pointing to is that we take it for granted. Like, we don't even think about taking a breath. Thankfully, either the body or something is breathing us. And yet, you're right. It's all about, like, at the core of all the spiritual practices of meditation, of anybody who's ever taken a yoga class has worked with the breath. like consciously. And you're right. It's like there's different breathing practices to support us in different parts of life. Is it somebody who can't sleep, or you're stuck in that crazy monkey mind of the mind, and we can't doesn't allow us to sleep, or we're stressed out before an important meeting or a test? The breath can calm us down and can drop us into the body and into that peaceful, natural state. And if we're a little tired and we've got an important meeting coming up, there are breathing techniques that help us focus and become more present, more centered, that can energize us rather than just reaching automatically for the cup of coffee. And the type of breath work that I do is longer. Like you do it for a particular period of time. You do it for about an hour and a half sometimes. And Rafael, amazing things happen. Just amazing things happen. Not only all the healing that I was talking about earlier, but people have profound spiritual experiences, for lack of another word. Like that veil that separates the realities of the realms. People go through them and they connect with loved ones who are no longer embodied. People have that experience of at-one-ment, feeling connected to all of creation. They see themselves as part of the cosmos. They see through the matrix of reality. And it's amazing just from using the breath. It's humbling.
It is really, really not only humbling, but it's huge when we can consider. You said something, Christian, about the breath, right? And the veil. And you made me have this image. Here's the image. I'm going to share it with you. You made me think of an image when a bride lifts the veil and the groom looks and they take their breath away. Literally. They're like, oh my God, I am blessed to be with this person. So when we can unveil so many aspects of our life, it doesn't have to be a wedding, but that's what just you made me think of it. When you can unveil aspects of your life that you have had trapped, it takes your breath away. It makes you realize how important your life truly is. And a lot of people, their cloak, their veil is so thick, you can't see anything. And so your breathing is not correct. I do qigong and heigong, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I meditate every morning, sometimes for hours, because when I don't sit and meditate, I move and meditate. So for me, movement is my meditation. And anytime when I'm doing something, and one of the things that I train some athletes and I teach them how to prolong what they're doing through their breath work. And without that, a lot of them come in, they're always, they're like, how come you're not? I'm like, you have to breathe right. You have to understand your body is a machine, and your breath work, just like water, is what's going to help it function at its highest level, right?
Yes. Yeah, and for people who might want to know more about this, we could talk about this for forever. But I have my TEDx talk is about the power of the breath, so they can just Google that and find out more about the philosophy around the breath.
So this is your website, right? Soulfulpower.com.
Correct.
Everybody
Right.
go to his website. This guy's not only amazing, but you can check out his TEDx talk as well.
And Rafael, when you were speaking about that veil visual, is like you gave me chills because I think it is. I think what we're talking about is ultimately marrying ourselves, like our authentic selves. Like tragically, most of us walk around not even knowing who we are, and living from these very surface aspects, personas that we put on a show. Like we're this way at work, this other way with our parents, this other way with the kids, this other way with our friends, with our spouses. It's exhausting. And of course, not to say that we have to share every single deepest part of us with everybody, right? We can be very retained choice about what we say to whom and when. But what a relief just to be who we are, wherever we are. Like we save so much energy that we otherwise spending trying to be something that we're not really authentically.
So many of us, and I'm not calling out the women in the world, because they put on a face, if you will, they put makeup on. So some of them hide behind the makeup. But if you ever go out and you see a woman with no makeup, she is not hiding for sure. She is who she is. And I know a lot of women who say, well, I can't leave my house without makeup. I'm like, but you're beautiful anyway. I mean, I've never seen them without makeup, but I'm saying you're beautiful anyway. And they're like, no, I can't leave the house without makeup. And it's because they have to present that image. Right? But if we let go of that image, one of the things that I always say about people is, if we were all blind, would we judge as much?
Say that again. If we were what?
Blind. All of us. The entire world was blind, like bats, right? And we can move around like bats, right? But if we would judge less, so much less. But we judge because it's what we see, what we think we should be seeing, or what the person presents. And like you talked about, many hats, and I got to be this way to that person, this way to this person. And you're right, it's very exhausting. And when you come in, like I said, I told that person, I'm dressed the way I'm dressed, not to impress you. I'm just doing it because it feels good to dress in a suit or put this outfit on. Right? I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. And when you can show up being you, man, it's a great feeling.
It's liberating. It's what we're going back to that word. It's empowering. It's liberating. And it's like we can take a deep breath. Finally, it's like, yeah, you know what? No matter what happens in life, I get to be myself, and I know that I'll be able to show up and handle it no matter what. And when we come from that place of such profound, I mean, that's self-confidence, right? We're like, one thing we know for sure is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way, whether it's a loss of a job or a global pandemic or an accident or whatever. So that's one way that we can just go, that so many of us go through life just in fear, anticipating that next shoe to drop. And what we're talking about is like, wait a minute, it's like, take a breath, chill out. I know that no matter what happens going forward, and no matter what happened in the past, I always get to choose, and I will know in the moment how to show up and what I need to do. And that's incredibly liberating. And that's that opens the door to profound inner peace.
So when and how on earth did you decide that you were doing what you were doing, but you needed to bring it to more people, to do a TEDx talk, to go around the world and speak at different places, conferences, whatnots, churches? What made you say, this is who I am? This is how I'm showing up, so people can recognize me that? What was that for you?
It's a good question. I mean, and again, I think it's always been there, that sense of mission.
Yeah, but you had to take action. What was your action?
Many points, and there were certain points that were like, oh crap, here we go. This is it, kind of thing. And I remember when I finished my first book some 20 years ago, and I had I had finally like submitted it, sent it to the publisher house, like to the publisher. That was it. And I had a moment of like, oh crap, like I wasn't going to say this, but I'll say this. For a while, I developed this pain on my side. Went to the doctor while I was writing the book. Went to the doctor, and there was nothing physically wrong, but it kept there. And so at that moment, when I finally submitted the final manuscript and it was done, the pain went away. And take this with a grain of salt, but a friend gifted me a session with a the readers. And so she said to me, I wouldn't say this to anybody, but what I saw was that I saw you on stage, in a previous lifetime, and you were speaking your truth, and you got shot, and you died for speaking your truth. And so, I don't know, who knows, but I do know that after that was a big choice point, because I didn't want to be in the public eye. And so, yet at the same time, I had the sense of mission, and thankfully, the sense of mission overrode the fear of being in the public eye.
Wow. So you were shot for telling the truth. Here's the crazy thing. The shirt that I'm wearing underneath, I'm gonna show you. 1 second. Let me see. I'm wearing a shirt underneath, and it says,
Wow.
right?
Wow. Just get chills.
So what truth are you hiding behind, right? That's what a lot of people do, hide behind the truth. They hide behind things. But when you actually just come out and say, I am who I am. Take me, hate me or love me, but here I am. Right? That speaks volumes, because it takes courage to do that as well. It's not just, I'm gonna kind of do it. You either have to do it all or you don't. You can't be wishy-washy, I believe. And that's why you have been able to expand. But also, I'm going to ask you, you talked about 20 years ago, you wrote your first book. What possessed you to write your first book? What was that? You said, I have to write this. And a lot of people write books for different reasons. What was your reason for writing?
Well,
And what was it about?
I had no desire or idea that I would ever write a book. I love books because I grew up reading, so I love my books. But a publisher actually came to me. They knew the work that I was doing at the time, and they said to me, would you want to write a book about that? And I had a simultaneous yes and F word. Like, oh crap,
Right.
because of that, because I didn't want to be in the public eye, and I knew that was going to open the door. And during the process of writing that book, there were a couple of moments where a couple of nights where I was literally in tears. Like, I didn't want to do this. And yet all the while, like the yes, right? I felt in a sense, I felt like I had been anointed, kind of with a sword to the shoulder kind of thing. It's like, here, do this. It's like, how could I say no to that? And here's another piece of wisdom for anybody who because every time I thought I had to write a book, I would freeze. So I missed my first. It's like, who am I? Who am I to write a book? I've never written a book. I don't have to say for 200-300 pages, and so I would freeze and miss my first deadline, which was only like a year. They didn't give me that much time the first time, so they added another 9 months. And this time I said, all right, I really have to write this book now. And here's the breakthrough in thinking about it, which anybody could apply to any aspect of their life. Is that, let me break it down, right? I'll start thinking of a chapter as a term paper. I can do term papers. I've done a bunch of term papers in high school and in college. I can do that. And so whenever we have to face something that we feel is like too much, that it's overwhelming, just break it down into smaller, manageable, more doable pieces. And that's how I got through that process of writing the first book.
Nice. That's awesome. But so let's talk about your latest book. And I believe the name of it is Awakening the Soul of Power.
Correct.
And you have one of my favorite Academy Award winners make a comment about your book. Tell me about her and how did she even get hands on your book? Hand deliver it to her?
Well, it actually took me like 3 years to court Gloria Estefan, who is a local. My family's in South Florida. I happen to be in South Florida right now, and she is she and Emilio have done amazing stuff for the community down here. Not only are they incredibly talented, um, but they're really good people authentically, and they contribute a lot to the community. So I read somewhere that she was going to speaking and be honored at some gala or something. So I went to the event, made my way to find her at the end, and was able to tell her, look, I love who you are, and the way that they used to play when it was Miami Sound Machine. They used to play at our high school bands. So we laughed about that, and we talked about her cousin who had passed, who used to be part of Miami Sound Machine before Gloria went solo. And so she said, look, I have a project that I think you want to hear about. And she gave me her manager's name. And so, manager doing his job as guard dog took me 2 years to get through because I wasn't hearing. And then finally it was like, all right, I'm giving up. I've got to go to press with this book. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try one more time. And I thought about, she probably gets so many requests to do this kind of stuff. What would be in it for her, right? So then I reframe my approach, and the book is part of a larger series about heroism, of what it means to live heroically in the 21st century. So I started that. I did some research. I found out her father had been a counter-revolutionary in Cuba in the same way that my parents had been. And so I spoke about his heroism and all the sacrifices that he had to make in order to do his work, to fulfill his mission. I spoke about her own heroism, the way that she had transcended that tragic bus accident that became a source of inspiration for so many people, how she recovered from that. And then I said to her, look, I know I have a message that's going to make an impact in many lives. I spoke to her about my belief that, particularly women's life, because I believe that the empowerment of women is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. And it's not to idealize women or to give women more crap that they have to do in this world. It's because as a world, as a species, we've been working so off balance, so off kilter between the masculine and the feminine energies that course through every one of us, right? They course through all of creation. It's in this little planet that we have turned the feminine into something that's weakness or less than. So whole other conversation, but actually relates to power too. And so this message I got, this time it clumped. He must have given it to her, and he said, right, just give us a week. And sure enough, she gave me that incredible testimonial.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So another message for anybody, listen, don't give up. If you have a calling or a particular sense that to do something, stick with it. Persistence.
One of the things, and I have it going across the screen, is crack your code, right, or know your code. And what you wound up doing was basically doing that, right? Finding out what made her passionate, what triggered an emotion for her.
Yes.
And so many of us, we go out there with blinders and we go, hey, I know who you are. No, you don't. You're not seeing me. You don't know who I am until you either ask me questions or you dig deep into who I am so we can communicate. So language is critical. You and I know how important language is, because when we came to this country, we didn't speak it, right? And here we are, we're speaking in this second language, if you will. But for me, even though I speak Spanish, I say, well, they're both my second languages. So a lot of people, and my fiance makes fun of me, and she goes, is English your second language? I said, no, Spanish is. So I go, and so is English. And then so it's very interesting when we can consider what you just said, is that you need to understand what drives you and what motivates you, and then go for it.
Yes.
Because a lot of people don't go for it. And later on, what do they have in life? Regrets. I don't want to have a life of regrets. I don't think you do either, right? Exactly. And I hope most of our listeners don't as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
What's the next step that you're taking in your life, if you don't mind sharing with the audience?
Of course not. Well, interestingly enough, I've been translating. I mean, I hired somebody to translate the book to Spanish, but now I'm going through it myself and putting it in my own words, and
Mm.
realizing that in some ways this translator, like put it through Google Translate, because that doesn't make sense. That's not how you say it. That's not what I meant. The subtleties that
Right.
that don't. And I've actually been spending time in South America, in Colombia specifically,
Really?
in Ecuador and Colombia, to improve my Spanish, because I want to be able to teach in Spanish fluently.
Nice.
And you're right, English is my second language, but I've been studying and reading in English since I was 10. So I have much more vocabulary and ability to express myself in English. And now my Spanish is getting better. It's not equal yet, but it's getting much better. I can actually teach in Spanish now. So that's up. And I'm also working on the second book of this series, Unconscious Relationships. I'm about halfway done with that.
Nice.
And because of the pandemic, after doing retreats for 30 years, and live events and facilitating breathwork experiences, I had to create online programming. Like, we couldn't be in the same room together breathing powerfully. And so I had to, like many people, pivot and shift, and created a really amazing, effective year-long coaching program. And I know people hear a year and it's like, oh my God, that's a long time. But that's part of the benefit, right? It's like, my retreats are amazing. People come and to a weekend and lives are transformed. And in some number of people, when they go back home, if they don't have a practice, a way to remember, a way to stay connected, if they don't have an accountability system, it's easy, right? There's so many distractions and demands of life that pretty soon, if we're not paying attention, those old voices of fear and self-doubt start sneaking up again and dragging us down. And then they'd have to come to another retreat. What I love about this concept of a year long is that I stretch out the teaching, right? Deliver bite size, a little bit of content every week, just a little bit. I know how busy everybody is, but two key differences that I'm not able to do on a weekend retreat. One is interactivity. So along with the content that they read, there are practices and questions designed to integrate those teachings, so that we don't need more information. We've got information overload. What we need is transformation. And that only comes from really taking on and living, applying a set of teachings. And so that allows me to do that. And then accountability, coaching calls with me on Zoom every 2 weeks. And what I'm noticing is it's making the transformation way more sustainable.
That's brilliant, because when you consider, and you said people don't have time because they're being pulled in every direction. It's like you step outside your house and there's like 5,000 hands on you.
Exactly.
What's going on here? But then you have to be selective as to which direction you want to go in. And when you talked about bite size, I mean, that's brilliant. That's what I do with Speaking Prowess, because we allow people in the courses to take it at their own pace. They can do it in front of a computer. They can take it on the go. They can listen to their car, on the train, wherever they are. And so when we can allow someone to learn at their pace, I think that's the most incredible way we can teach people. Because this way, what happens with a lot of people, and you know this, they start something and they stop. Meanwhile, I was at an event recently. People paid thousands of dollars to be at this event. And there was 50 badges that I saw, about 56. Those people didn't show up, but they still paid.
Wow.
Something had to have happened to these people. Did they forget? Were they being pulled to many places, and when they said yes and made their payments, and didn't? So you got to consider that when you are being drawn to something, you have to make some sort of a commitment, right?
Yes.
In order to be in it. And so I love the fact that you are allowing people, and you stretched it, as you said, in order to people to be able to say, I can take bite sizes of this. And the fact that you're doing coaching every 2 weeks, that's beautiful. So
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you. And it's really good, because people going through life, and then stuff comes up, right? Challenges at home, in the relationship, challenges at work. So we get to apply the teachings in real time. And I think that's what's making it so effective. And I love that you have that approach. Is like, where were you, Rafael, when I needed speaking prowess 30 years ago or longer?
Yeah. But you know what? We're here now.
You were- yeah.
You know, sometimes the timing is not correct, but when the timing is, boom, that's when you show up, and that's where people can find you, and that's how people are finding you as well. So do me a favor, go to soulfulpower.com and check out Christian, because the guy is amazing. So Christian, thank you so much. I truly appreciate you taking the time. I know how valuable that is to be here with me. I feel like I have been gifted with your presence today. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for having the show, because in your willingness to say yes and to override whatever resistance you had to it, as a result, many lives are being impacted and helped. So thank you.
Yeah. And everybody, if you like the show, share it, because somebody can come back and rewatch this, or share with somebody who didn't watch it yet, because Christian has a lot of great information to share with you guys. Everybody have yourself an amazing, amazing rest of your day. Take care, everybody. Christian, pleasure, my friend.